Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the Superdome, getting set for the Eagles matchup in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. EJ, how you doing?
I think I should say I'm feeling super, Superdome, Super Bowl. I like that. So, yeah, no, I'm excited for the show. It's been a long road to get here, but there's been a lot of great stories in the last 2 weeks that I think, I've really been excited about that too. But I'm glad that we're finally here. I'm glad that we're finally at this game. And, I think it's going to be a great game. So, yeah, no, I'm excited.
We're excited to have all of you with us here as usual. As always, you can be a part of our conversation. Head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. You can leave us a question, a comment, whatever is on your mind throughout the show. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll answer some of those questions of yours during a segment later in today's show. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit. All right, EJ, let us get into the health currently of this team, this Eagles team, and we just got our inactives list. It doesn't look like anything is presently out of the ordinary compared to what we were expecting. One big name I will say that is on here that I think is worth noting is the fact that defensive end Bryce Huff is inactive for the game. Now, Huff has been dealing. He recently underwent, in the last month or so, he underwent wrist surgery and has come back and really has not played much of a role in this Eagles defense. His snaps have been awfully minimal, and when he has been able to get in this postseason run, it has typically been at the very end of the game, kind of in garbage time, especially if you think back to last week or 2 weeks ago in the NFC Championship game against the Washington Commanders. What does Bryce Huff's future look like with this Eagles team, EJ?
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of is like a full circle moment. They signed him to a 3-year deal worth about $51 million probably 11 months ago. And now, here they are in the Super Bowl, and they kind of see him as, kind of excess at that position at this point. And I think that it's deserved that he's inactive. If you look at his production throughout the year, he has not been very productive. I know he's dealt with the injury, but yeah, I think that with Brandon Graham coming back, which is probably the next person we're going to talk about, I feel like, he kind of lost that spot in the rotation, and I think, yeah, it's justifiable that they don't have him on the active roster.
Right, exactly, EJ. The big reason why Huff is likely inactive is because Brandon Graham is back on the active roster from injured reserve after tearing his triceps in Week 12 against the Los Angeles Rams. At the time, I remember we spoke to Brandon Graham in the game in the locker room after the game, and he was awfully dejected, thinking that this was it for him. It was a season-ending injury, and ultimately it was a regular season-ending injury, but here he is, able to suit up for this game in the Super Bowl. Obviously, he did not know at the time the Eagles would be able to get this far, but alas, they did, and he was able to get healthy enough in time. Realistically, EJ, how much do you expect Brandon Graham to play in today's game?
Yeah, I think he's probably going to have that Bryce Huff role. I mean, I think it's important to remember that he is very much ahead of schedule on this timeline for the torn triceps injury. I mean, yeah, when he said he tore that after that Rams game, we did not expect to see him. So I think it is just such a cool story, to kind of nerd out as a journalist here, kind of just appreciate like the storybook nature of this. He's been a Super Bowl hero for this team before. For him to be able to come back for this game, yeah, I think that is a major achievement. It's a credit to him. I remember when the speculation started. It's like, man, there's no way he can come back from that injury that quickly, but he's been able to do it. So yeah, I don't expect to see him out there a whole lot. I guess with Vic Fangio, you never really know what to expect in terms of playing time and snap counts. But I feel like he'll probably have a limited role. I think it's more about the boost that he can give the team, maybe off the field more than the necessarily the on-field impact. I mean, again, he's been a Super Bowl hero before, but I think he's going to have a limited role, and I think that it is just kind of special that he's going to be able to be out there with the team. And, yeah, what you mentioned, like what might be his final game.
Number 61.
It's good to see Brandon Graham back in action as the Eagles get later and later into the season. As always with any team, teams are banged up at this time of year. The Chiefs are no different. The Eagles are dealing with some nicks and knacks here and there. And that being said, everyone is still good to go on the active roster. But there are some players who are notably dealing with injuries, including Devontae Smith. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury, and he was limited in practice all week. I think it's worth pointing out simply because Smith missed 2 games earlier this year in weeks 11 and 12 with a hamstring injury. Now, it is uncertain. It's unclear if it is the same injury that Smith is dealing with, but nonetheless, it's worth noting. And additionally, Cam Jurgens, we saw him sustain a back injury midway through the playoffs, he was not able to start the NFC Championship game against the Commanders. However, he ultimately had to come into the game because Landon Dickerson went down with a knee injury. He had been subbing in for Juergens at center. So the two of them have been working their way back. They were full participants in practice on Thursday and Friday, and they are good to go. So just good to see the offensive line continuing to get their health back. That said, some players have been dealing with illnesses as well throughout the week. Everything is happening. Jalen Carter, he was a full participant on Thursday and Friday in practice, but he was limited on Wednesday as he dealt with that illness. So again, everyone dealing with some nicks and knacks. But when you think about it, especially regarding Devontae Smith, EJ, what is your concern level for him as he continues to nurse this hamstring injury that potentially was also the same one that he was dealing with earlier in the season?
Yeah, I'm sure that I've said on this show before that hamstrings can be tricky, and honestly, it's because they can. It's a tough injury to deal with, and it's the type of thing where he might not be able to fully trust it. So I think we'll get a good sense in the first couple of series, what exactly his, how close he might be to 100%. Back when he had the hamstring injury, and again, we don't know if it's the same hamstring, but back when he had the hamstring injury midseason, he talked about sometimes it's just, you're only going to make it worse by playing through it. And obviously now that it's the postseason, I do wonder if that is something that maybe he doesn't have as much regard for, if he is going to make it worse, because he has a long off season to kind of let it recuperate. So like I said, the fact that he's not able to trust it, maybe he isn't able to run full speed or get in and out of his breaks, with the same type of urgency that he normally would. I think it's going to be really telling in those first couple series how much he can trust that hamstring.
Keep an eye on there. Now, on the other side, the Chiefs are good to go in terms of everyone on the active roster. So they are continuing to roll along here in the postseason. All right, let us get into our latest headlines segment. This is a very familiar stage for a number of the Eagles players, including Jalen Hurts. He is back in the Super Bowl for the second time in the last 3 years. He remembers the heartbreak against the Kansas City Chiefs just a couple of years ago. And he's also very well acquainted with defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo. And we all expect to see lots of different exotic pressure looks as Spagnuolo likes to typically present to these quarterbacks. Especially Hurts knows it better than anyone else. I mean, he saw Spagnuolo just a couple years ago in the Super Bowl, and Hurts at the time fared pretty well against the blitz. He was blitzed on 35.7% of his dropbacks in that Super Bowl, according to Next Gen stats. And he avoided a sack. He completed 11 of 15 passes for 91 yards. Now, I know last season a big talking point, EJ, was the fact that Hurts was not faring nearly as well against the blitz. This year, he has been much better. Not only is his completion percentage a tick better, 64.2% completion, he is remarkably better when it comes to turning the ball over. He has only thrown one interception against the blitz. When you look at this matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs between Hurts and Spagnuolo, how do you see this all shaking out in terms of what the Eagles will need to do in order to mitigate some of the pressure situations that the Chiefs are going to present?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest questions of this game. Steve Spagnuolo, you mentioned it, very creative in his pressure packages. He has an exotic pressure package at times, and they've had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. They're going to have some things on their menu that have worked against the Eagles in the past. The Eagles are going to have answers for that. Jalen Hurts is going to need to be able to sort out the pre-snap looks, but figure out where the pressure is coming from and have a good plan for it, because there have been times this season where they've struggled, even against teams that don't blitz as frequently as the Chiefs, even against teams that don't generate as much pressure as the Chiefs usually generate with those pressure looks. The Eagles have struggled at times. So I think that's one of the biggest questions is, in known passing situations, when it's third and long, when it's second and long, and the Eagles need to get ahead of the chains and they're going to have to throw the football. I think there are going to be instances where, that's where Steve Spagnuolo is going to be able to kind of get creative, kind of open up his play sheet and, like I said, pressure Jalen Hurts with some of those exotic looks. So we've seen them, again, have mixed results against that. I think that's going to be really determinant whether or not the passing game, which side of the Eagles passing game we see. We've seen them be really dominant at times this year. We've seen them struggle. I think that will be the determining factor.
One way to potentially keep the pressure off of Hurts would be to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, and the Eagles have shown that they really love to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley. He is only 30 yards away from passing Hall of Famer Terrell Davis for the most rushing yards in a single season in NFL history. That is, of course, including the playoffs. Now, the big question is can Barkley continue to be the X factor, the guy that is able to chew up a ton of yardage on the ground as he has been all season long? Because that isn't typically the recipe for success for offenses that win Super Bowls, especially in recent history. You look back in the last 10 years, only 2 running backs have eclipsed 100 rushing yards in the Super Bowl. That would be Damian Williams for Kansas City back in 2020, Marshawn Lynch being the other one with the Seattle Seahawks in 2015. I think at this point, EJ, it is like abnormal to not see Saquon Barkley eclipse 100 rushing yards. The Chiefs really haven't allowed any running backs to get over 100 yards in a single game. The only player who was able to do that this year was Lamar Jackson, quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. He's the only rusher to eclipse 100 yards this season against the Chiefs. That said, EJ, can the Eagles continue to ride Saquon Barkley on the ground to dominate?
Yeah, I feel like the Eagles' run game so far this season has been pretty scheme agnostic, or pretty, I would say, pretty defense agnostic as well. Even some of the better run defenses in the league haven't really been able to slow down Saquon Barkley. If you think about the times that Saquon Barkley has been slowed down, it was really that one half against the Washington Commanders, and we saw in the NFC Championship game that even that really didn't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I think the diversity of their run game, the fact that they have so many different answers. They've got zone schemes. They've got gap schemes. They have different ways to sort of, they got misdirection schemes. They've got different ways that they can take advantage of defensive looks. I really think that combined with the talent advantages that they have, the offensive line being as dominant as they are, and then Saquon Barkley just being so hard to tackle with 1 or 2 players, I feel like, that formula it makes it so that even really smart defenses, even really talented defenses like the Chiefs have, they aren't able to stop this run game. So, you mentioned it, like we talked about the passing game, whether or not they're going to be able to handle pressure looks. The key thing there was, I mentioned, like, it's known passing situations that you can really get into those looks. The Eagles might be able to stay ahead of the chains with their running game, and then that's going to really neutralize those blitz looks and those pressure looks. So I think that is, I said that will be the determining factor for the pass game. Really, I think the determining factor for the game is whether or not Saquon Barkley can kind of give the Eagles the option to control this game. If they can lean heavily on their run game, then I feel like they can keep the Chiefs offense off the field. The last thing I wanted to say is that this Chiefs defense, has been really good against the run, but quarterback inclusive run games, like against the Steelers during the regular season, in the playoffs against the Bills and the Texans, we've seen, teams have some success running the ball. They've given up around 150 rushing yards each of the last 2 games. So yeah, it might not be a 100-yard running back surpassing that number, but I think because of Jalen Hurts' the fact that he is +1 in the Eagles run game, I feel like they should be able to have success on the ground against the Chiefs.
You mentioned Saquon Barkley is going to try to take over this game. On the other side of the ball, the Chiefs have their own player on offense who is going to try to take over this game, and that is quarterback Patrick Mahomes. I would say, EJ, that, and we'll get into our predictions later, but the Eagles have the more talented team overall. That said, the Chiefs have 2 of the best in the league in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid at their respective roles. Now, this is a very different looking Chiefs offense than the one that we have seen in the past, even though it's still the same quarterback with Mahomes at the helm. It is a little bit less dynamic. It's a little less explosive, and there has been more of an emphasis on Mahomes getting the ball out quickly in the quick passing game and just taking advantage of those short gains, death by 100,000 million paper cuts, more or less. He has fewer downfield threats, and we see Mahomes continuing to rely on guys like Travis Kelce, really his favorite target in the passing game, his ability to take advantage of the middle of the field and put a little bit of stress on those linebackers, on those safeties. He has been as well his favorite target when Mahomes goes to scramble in those scramble drill situations. Kelce leaves the Chiefs in targets and receptions on scramble plays this season, including the postseason. When you look at what this Kansas City Chiefs offense has become with Mahomes still having the potential to take over games, what is the key for the Eagles defense and Vic Fangio to making sure that he doesn't?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. I think the first thing that you have to acknowledge and accept if you're Vic Fangio is that you're playing one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, someone who has really excelled on this stage several times in his career. You're not going to shut him down. But I think you can have some clues looking at some past Super Bowls that Mahomes has been involved in. When the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat this Chiefs team, well, not exactly this Chiefs team, but a few years ago, it was behind pressure. It was about the fact that Mahomes did not have a clean pocket to operate out of. So I think that will become, a really big part of the game for the Eagles defense. You've heard me talk before about how against elite quarterbacks, you need to be able to generate pressure with a 4-man rush. I think, against Mahomes, that is the only formula that really works, is being able to have bodies in coverage while also still being able to flush him out of the pocket. And then the last thing, I mentioned it just a second ago, I think controlling the game. The Eagles learned very, very recently in 2022, I guess it was 2023, 2 years ago, 2 seasons ago, what happens if Patrick Mahomes gets the ball late in the game, and his ability to make, to have big plays and big moments in those final moments of a game. So I think being able to control the game with Saquon Barkley in the running game will be a really big deal. Being smart in the fourth quarter, I guess one team must have just come out with all the boos that we're hearing. I think being smart in the fourth quarter, being able to make sure that they do not have the ball in those situations or running away with it. Obviously that is the easiest answer, is to just, have a decisive lead before then. But I think game state's going to be really important for this game. We've seen the Eagles like to play in a certain game state. We haven't really seen them have to chase a lead very often. Against this Chiefs team, I think that's really important. Kind of force them into being a one-dimensional team and then be able to use your pass rush to your advantage that way.
If that was, I would say there were quite a few boos, EJ. I don't know what you heard, but it sounded to me like perhaps there are some Eagles fans in this crowd. There are quite a few Eagles fans in this crowd. And the ones that aren't in this crowd are currently over on Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. And if you aren't already over there, you can leave us a question during the game, and we will answer some of those in real time as the game gets underway. But let's take some of these questions here right now in your comments. Let's start with this one here from Jay Galt. They say that Jalen Hurts is going to have a monster game as he wills this team to a Super Bowl victory. Had a monster game a couple years ago, and even just a couple weeks ago, he had a monster game too, completing 20 of 28 passing attempts for 246 yards and a touchdown. Plus, he also took over on the ground with just a few rushing touchdowns, one of those being an actual rushing touchdown, 2 other of those being tush-push touchdowns. Especially, that was a significant game for Hurts to show that he is still capable of taking over in the passing game when need be. The previous 2 playoff games that the Eagles played against the Packers and the LA Rams was a little bit less of an emphasis on the passing game, more of an emphasis on the run game, as the Eagles defeated both of their opponents in that game. That said, EJ, what do you expect in this game? Do you expect Hurts to be able to take over if called upon?
Yeah, we've seen him play well on big stages, at least, recently. Like you mentioned a couple years ago, NFC Championship game. I think obviously, the beginning of his public career and in college, sometimes he didn't have the best games and big moments. But really with the Eagles, he has been more often than not, consistent, or even take his game to the next level on the bigger stages. So I think there's reason to believe that he'll play well. Obviously, like I mentioned it earlier, this passing game has been Jekyll and Hyde at times this year. We've seen games where it looks really good as a complementary force, for Saquon Barkley. There have been games where it maybe is a little disjointed. Maybe it takes a backseat to Saquon Barkley and gets out of rhythm as a result. Jalen Hurts has been really seeming to prioritize avoiding turnovers. But I think in the NFC Championship game, that's the formula. That's what it looks like when it's really going well. He's able to deliver third down situations, really deliver when they need him to deliver, and then the running game can kind of take care of the rest. So, whether or not he has to go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes the way that he did 2 years ago, that remains to be seen. We'll see. But, I do think that the way that he's played on some of these big stages, you can feel confident that he is going to be able to play, a good enough game for them to win.
Goldie says, we've got another great question here from Goldie. They say that these are 2 great teams who always find a way to win. Neither team has turned the ball over this postseason. Now, EJ, as we know, the Eagles have been much, much improved since the bye week in terms of their turnover differential. Before the bye week, we saw Jalen Hurts struggle mightily with tossing interceptions. And then after the bye week, he severely cut down, and then including running into that postseason too. And not only has Hurts been better at protecting the ball, but we've also seen the Eagles defense and even special teams too get better at forcing turnovers. And there's really no better microcosm of the Eagles' success in the turnover differential than that NFC Championship game just a couple of weeks ago. How big of an emphasis do you think this is going to be on both sides for both teams to play clean football?
Yeah, I mean, it's been the story of the Eagles postseason, right? They lead the postseason in turnover differential. I feel like, the defense has been so opportunistic all year, and like that has been kind of their superpower. You look at this defense, and obviously they're talented across the board, but in terms of like what makes them, the best defense in the NFL, which they were in the regular season, and especially in the postseason, when you look at it, it's really being able to force turnovers and be opportunistic, kind of force teams. It's funny, like when Jonathan Gannon was the defensive coordinator, you heard a lot about kind of like forcing teams into long drives, make them go the long way and force them, and kind of wait for them to make mistakes. This is really the best that we've seen this defense be able to do that, and it's because they punch at the ball. They're opportunistic in coverage. They're able to force turnovers and force mistakes as a result, and that has been kind of, like I said, the thing that makes them so special. So it'll be huge, as it has been all season for them.
Thank you so much, Goldie, for your comment. Let us take this question here from Shooter64. The kickers are special teams, which are often the difference in close games. I'm nervous about Jake Elliott. That is certainly something that I'm sure a lot of Eagles fans feel similarly about. Jake Elliott simply just has not been nearly as accurate and efficient as he has been in going back to last season, when he was really remarkable. This season, he has really struggled, particularly beyond 50 yards, only making one of those kicking attempts this year. EJ, if this game comes down to a long field goal from Jake Elliott, and really any length of field goal from Jake Elliott, if it comes down to him, how confident should Eagles fans feel that he will be able to deliver in that moment?
Yeah, I think there's some valid concern and some earned skepticism on him from long distance. Obviously, throughout his career, he has been consistent there, but this year he has not been consistent enough for me to really make an argument that you should feel confident. I'm curious if, like, especially playing the Chiefs, the book on the Chiefs is you can't settle for field goals early in the game. I do wonder if Jake Elliott's inconsistency from long range will kind of play into that decision-making from Nick Sirianni, because I think in those situations you could justifiably be aggressive anyway. So, obviously late in the game might be a different animal, but early in the game I am curious if the Eagles are at midfield in a fourth down situation, whether they choose to go for it or whether they choose to send Jake Elliott out to try a longer field goal based off of, what he's done all season.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It is a question I'm sure we'll get an answer as this game gets underway in just a little bit. All right, let us move on to our Inquirer player picks. EJ, we have listed a number of different players that we are eager to watch in today's Super Bowl. If you had to pick just one, though, who are you most intrigued by in this matchup?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Reed Blankenship. We mentioned Travis Kelce earlier in the show and how important he is to this Chiefs offense. When you look through their receiving options, he really does stand out as the most proven commodity. DeAndre Hopkins is obviously a part of that too, but really, in terms of who's been a part of the Chiefs for a long time and who's really the center of that passing game, Travis Kelce really stands out. And honestly, that's an unfavorable matchup for the Eagles defense. We've seen them struggle at times this year against tight ends, most recently in the NFC Championship game against Zach Ertz, a former Eagles tight end, someone, who I guess the Eagles should know very well. But, he had 11 catches for 104 yards in that NFC Championship game. And he's kind of the same player as Travis Kelce. Obviously they have their differences, but they're both savvy tight ends, veteran tight ends who can find the soft spots in zones. And I think will get matched up against Reed Blankenship a lot in coverage at times, in man coverage or match coverage, which it basically plays out like man coverage. So, Reed Blankenship said earlier this week, like he expects to be matched up, him and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, to be matched up against Travis Kelce at times during the game. And I think that's a matchup the Chiefs are going to like. I think they're going to, try and pinpoint that matchup. They'll test Reed Blankenship. So, when you're looking across the board at this Chiefs offense, where are they going to be able to find production? I think Reed Blankenship might be the answer for whether or not they are successful because of those matchups when Kelce is lined up against them.
EJ, I'm going to pick another player on the Eagles defense, and that player is Nolan Smith, who has had a rapid, sharp ascent in his second season with the Eagles. He has really turned it on in recent weeks, especially in these playoffs. He already is up to 4 sacks. He could potentially have as many more. He could really continue to exploit that matchup that he is expected to have against Jawan Taylor at right tackle. This Kansas City Chiefs offensive line, especially at the tackles, is a little bit weak, and Taylor is probably the weakest of them. He has allowed 41 pressures this season, which is tied for 7th among most starting offensive tackles this season. So quite a bit. I have a feeling that Smith might be able to try to take advantage of him and continue to add to his sack total as he has all season long. So certainly is someone to watch there. All right, we have to make our predictions now, everyone, for the last time this season. And to do that, I am pleased to be joined by Jeff McLean. And Jeff, before you give us your prediction for today's game, I am very intrigued to know, what is your matchup to watch?
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. I'm definitely going to be focused on Chris Jones and how the Eagles handle him, or more likely, how they have their attention diverted towards him. He could get the Aaron Donald treatment in this game, which means that the Eagles will probably just slide protection to his side whenever they get the opportunity. That being said, he moves around a lot. He'll line up over the tackles. He'll line up over the guards. He may even line up over the center. So a lot of times it's very difficult to know exactly where Chris Jones is coming from. They did a very good job against him 2 years ago in the Super Bowl. He didn't have any sacks. He had a few pressures. But last year in the regular season game that the Eagles did win, he had 2 sacks and it was a menace up front. I think the other issue, though, the Eagles have to consider with Jones is the fact that 2 of their interior guys aren't 100%. As you guys mentioned, Cam Jurgens has the back, and Landon Dickerson has the knee. So how much is that going to factor into how they block Chris Jones, especially if they get him one-on-one? Because Jones is too tough to block one-on-one for an entire game. And as Jeff Stoutland said to me the other day, Chris Jones is a game record. And on that defense, I know that George Karlaftis has done a really good job here in this postseason, rushing from the end. But when the Eagles think about one guy in this defense, it's Chris Jones that they have circled.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jeff, well, with that matchup in mind, what is your final score prediction?
Yeah, so I'm going with the Eagles. I didn't pick them 2 years ago, and I only bring that up not to pat myself on the back, but to let everyone know that I'm not playing a homer here. But I just think that this team has way too much depth, is talented, more talented than the Chiefs. I don't feel 100% confident about the pick. Obviously, this is a Chiefs team that's coming off 2 straight Super Bowl wins. They've won 3 of the last 5. Andy Reid is going to have something that the Eagles are not going to be. That the Eagles are not going to be prepared for. Patrick Mahomes, if he has the ball with 4 minutes left and not down by just one one score, Chiefs probably going to end up winning the game. But I think the Eagles are going to have Saquon Barkley. He's going to get some yards on the ground. I think they're going to be able to play from ahead. And if they're up 2 scores with about, like I said, 4 minutes left, then I see an Eagles victory, and I have them winning 31-23.
All right, EJ, what is your final score for this year?
Final score. I like that. I also went with the Eagles. I, unlike Jeff, went with the Eagles last time too. Full disclosure. I think the biggest difference when you look at the last 2 years though is this Eagles defense. You think about the fact the Eagles were able to get that lead 2 years ago and they weren't able to protect it. I feel a lot more confident in this Eagles defense being able to protect the lead late. And then I really also think the other big difference, Saquon Barkley, is kind of the main reason why I feel like the Eagles can win this game. I feel like they should be able to control this game, even especially in those final moments, that fourth quarter when possessions start to become really important. I think that the Eagles offense is better equipped to control the ball in those situations. So I think they will be able to do that, unlike last time. And I feel like as a result, I think they'll be able to win this game. So I had it 34-31. I think that there will be points. Famous last words there, but I think there will be points, and I think the Eagles will be able to control the ball late to get the win.
I am also picking the Eagles. However, my final score is 31-27. As I said earlier in the show, I feel like the Eagles at the end of the day are simply the better team, and the better team doesn't always win. We see Patrick Mahomes, as you've all mentioned, has been able to take over games late. The Eagles want to do a good job of keeping the ball out of his hands, and that is something that truly they have done pretty good job of, is controlling that time of possession this season. They're absolutely going to need to continue to do so in today's game. I think Saquon Barkley is a huge upgrade over the running back core that they had 2 years ago. He has been absolutely dynamite for the Eagles this season, and I think once more he will, as he has all season long, he will be the difference maker for this Eagles team in today's Super Bowl. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in to Inquire Live at Gameday Central. Just as a reminder, if you're not already over there, head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. You can comment in real time with us. We will be answering your questions during the game, so we look forward to seeing you there in just a little bit.
And please keep up with more Eagles coverage on my podcast, Uncovering the Birds. New episodes have been released every week during the season. We'll probably take a little time off after the Super Bowl, but listen to wherever you get your podcasts or to go to Inquirer.com/podcasts.
Thanks so much for tuning into Game Day Central, and we will see you next time.